Folks. Good morning, good morning, good morning. My name is Dwayne Quasey Wright. I am an assistant professor of higher education administration, as well as the director of diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives at the Graduate School for Education and Human Development, which is part of the George Washington University in our nation's capital. And I have the distinct pleasure this morning of welcoming you to our fall 2023 Youthful Knowledge Workshop. As part of our DEI, Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion initiatives here at GSHED, in the fall of 2021, we decided to inaugurate an annual event that sort of highlighted both internal and external GSHED research towards areas that we thought the community needed a little bit more oomph and education on. Our initial event was targeted towards the issue of critical race theory. Last year, we did an event targeted on academic freedom, both issues that have not gone away. And as is typical with GSHED events, we have another very timely event here today on the education of the world's refugees. The United Nations defines refugees, and I will read the definition, as people who have fled war, violence, conflict, or persecution, and have crossed an international border to find safety in another country. They often have fled with little or more than the clothes on their back, leaving behind homes, possessions, jobs, and loved ones. Homes, possessions, jobs, and loved ones. It is clear with all that is going on in the world, including an ongoing war in Ukraine and a recent war that just exploded in the Middle East, that the issue of refugees is a timely one on the minds of those in the world. Particularly with the ongoing climate crisis, we know that the number of refugees and those that are children and of learning age will explode within the near future. While the UN's definition says that refugees often go with little more than the clothes on their back, and I will read again, leaving behind homes, possessions, jobs, and loved ones. The other thing that many children who are refugees leave behind is the chance at an advanced education. Therefore, GW, and particularly the Graduate School of Education, has taken a particular interest in both the research, practice, and stories behind refugees, how they persist, and most importantly, how we provide those that are refugees with something that really is a basic human right in the 21st century, and that is a quality education. As such, this year's Useful Knowledge Workshop will all be about the education of those that we consider refugees, those that have been made refugees by struggle, and those that will be made refugees in the future. Today, we have an event from about 9 to noon with an all-star lineup. Initially, we will be greeted by Dr. Bernhard Streitwieser, Katharine Summers, and Jessica Crist, who represent the REAL Lab. It's a really good acronym, and they do really good work, but I won't steal their thunder. They have produced a book called Accessing Quality Education, a local and global perspectives from refugees, and they will be telling you not just about the book and the lab, but all the work that they have done over the last couple of years, and we thank them for that. After that, at the 10 o'clock hour, we'll be joined by Dr. Jay Cha, an assistant professor of international education and national affairs, to talk about the power of storytelling, and we'll get directly some of the stories of refugees. Then at the 11 o'clock hour, we will wrap up with understanding the experience of LGBTQI asylum seekers. And we know that the connection between seeking asylum, refugee status, and being part of the LGBT community has been solidified, even if and as the LGBTQ population has been under attack, not just in international, but here abroad as well. So without further ado, we thank you for joining us. We hope that you will take a little piece of knowledge away from our Useful Knowledge Workshop. A little bit about how this works here at GSHED. We are an inclusive bunch. We want this to be a conversation. The issue of refugees, particularly with everything that's going on in the world right now, is sure to drudge up some very, I would say, not necessarily bad, but close to the heart feelings. Please be respectful and engaging both with your presenters and everyone else in the audience. We are here to learn, not necessarily argue, but we do encourage you to engage. We've never had to do this. I don't like doing this, but if anyone acting naughty, we will remove you from this event, as the spirit of this event is one of inquiry, not one of inquisition. Second, from that, now that we've gotten through that, please feel free to use the chat. We do not have a time for introductions, but it's a small group here. Introduce yourself, where you're from, what brings you to this event, and the presenters will take note, and we will take note as well. At the end of each of our 3 presentations, we will have some time for Q&A, but you're not limited to the time for Q&A. You will have the opportunity to engage throughout the event, and we'll ask that you use the chat function for that to leave your questions, your concerns, or share any knowledge that you have, either about your personal experience or refugees within the chat. You can put a chat in the chat box for all to see, or you can send a direct message to myself. Once again, I'm Dwayne Wright, and I will present that to the presenters at the end of the presentation, or even in the next presentation if we don't get time for that. Okay, so I think all the housekeeping is sort of taken care of. Without further ado, I will turn it over to my friend, Dr. Bernhard Streitwieser, for our first presentation. Bernhard, take it away.
Great. Well, thank you, Dr. Wright. It's so great to be on this call, and I'm so honored to be on it today with my co-editors, Jessica Crist and Katharine Summers, who I just can't say enough amazing things about. They're just terrific, and you'll see that today when they talk to you. I'm also really honored to be on this call with my dear colleague, Jay Cha, who is also wonderful and has some really deep and important research on this topic. And then Mina and Bagmi, who I've met a couple times. They've been friends of our lab, and I think their research is super, super important, and it really gets to something that's not discussed enough. So I'm really glad they're getting the chance to present today as well. And this is our first book premiere, which is very, very exciting because we're just so thrilled to finally get this book out. It's almost out. We're still wrangling with a couple last issues, like what kind of cover design are we going to have, and have the index has the index been done correctly, but it's basically there. So we'll have it in hand very soon. So Jessica, do you want to put up the slides and we'll take it away? Well, this is the title of the book, as you can see, accessing quality education, rather, local and global perspectives from refugees. And then there's even a subtitle beyond that says case studies of refugees in the DMV area, but that's not on the cover of the book. And so next slide. So what we'll do today is just basically, I'll do a very quick introduction to what the REAL, or Refugee Educational Advancement Laboratory, is. Then we'll talk about the study itself, some of the takeaways, and then how we went through the publication process and some information, and then get to some questions. So, and we'll do it pretty snappy because I know we've got a tough timeline. Basically, the lab came about because I was trying to dig back and how it sort of started. I was doing research starting in 2016 on what was happening in Germany, because I was reading stories about more and more refugees coming in from the Middle East, and I didn't really know what was going on, so I started looking into it and realized that the civil war in Syria that started in 2011 was ongoing and getting worse and worse and worse. And by this point in 2015/16, a lot of people were deciding they simply had to leave, especially young men who did not want to be dragged into one or the other side of the war, and whose parents said you should leave. And they were the first ones to leave the country if they could still, or when they could still. And there were some interesting stories that they told when we interviewed them about just getting out of the country without being caught by the militaries and pulled into the conflict. And also some very brave young women that left at great personal peril without their families. So, and I know this because I started a refugee research group in Berlin to look at this with colleagues over there. And we did a number of studies. I went there a couple times on site visits, and we talked to administrators and students experiencing the refugee situation in Germany because of the Syrian conflict, but also Iraqi students, Iranians, et cetera. So that led to quite a number of papers and presentations and a good amount of data that then led me to say, well, this is such an important topic. I'm going to create a course So that led to the course 6640, Migrants, Refugees, and Education, Addressing a Global Challenge, that I first tried to teach in 2020. I didn't get enough enrollment for whatever strange reason, because the next year I got a very large enrollment, over 15 students, and I taught it that spring of 2021. And as I was teaching the course, I had fantastic students. Two of them are here on the call, Jessica and Katie. They wrote a very good paper. They each wrote separate papers, but they both of the topics were on Latin America. And I wrote them both and said, you know, these papers were different, but they were on the same geographic area that I don't know much about, but it was a really excellent paper. Would you guys be open to bringing your two papers together and me helping you shape that into a publication, submission for publication? And they were both interested. And we had a couple of long meetings, some at my house in the summer, and we actually pulled together the two papers into one paper and got it off to a journal. And it eventually got accepted into a very good journal, which is super exciting. But that kind of collaboration led me to also realize that, look, we need more of a space to do this research beyond just one class, one semester. I might try to start up some kind of group. And that was this email to Jessica on March 9th, right before COVID. So I just proposed this idea. I'm mulling over the possibility of starting something. Would you be interested? Some kind of summer project. I'm thinking it's not going to be paid, but we could work together. And she was luckily very interested. And that led to the beginning of the lab. And I was just thinking, what do I call it? Refugees, there's education, there's refugees, there's the word laboratory, advancement. Oh my God, real, that's a great acronym. Let's go with it. And so, and basically it was just like, I'm going to make a website, and we used GW's blog website thing. It was free, luckily, because we didn't want to pay for a monthly subscription to something else. I just got students together who were interested in doing this, and we formed a group, and things kind of snowballed from there. And this year, we've got 15 students. They're very dedicated. We've got 2 student leaders. We've got, regular blogs we put out every month. We've got events. We've got guest speakers. We did get some money also to start the lab from the Gomez La Masters Fund, which was amazing. And we're just making things happen in this space of refugee and migration work. And there really is a need for it at GW, and there's a great enthusiasm for it within the education school, with a lot of people who want to get into this work, voluntarily giving of their time, giving of their research skills. We've got people who have web skills, who have outreach skills, who have event planning skills, who have research skills in different areas. It's really exciting, and it's a lot of fun. It's not that much work because we all split the work together and have a good time doing it. But this is just to encourage the idea of making a group of harnessing the energy and great intelligence and skills of our GW students and making something happen. And it's it can work. So that's about it on the lab. I'm going to turn it over to Jessica and Katie. Here's a photo of our first group. This was sort of the inaugural team. Everyone in this picture has graduated, but many of them have stayed connected and continue to be part of the lab, even though they're doing their own careers now, and many of them in research and refugee work. So they're continuing with that theme, but it's just a lot of fun. I really, really love it. So over to you guys.
Great. Thank you so much for recapping that. So thanks everyone for being here. So if we fast forward, those initial lab discussions were in the spring, and then in fall of 2021, the lab actually got started. And we were thinking about, we wanted to have a seminal big piece that we could present, that we could all dig our hands into, because we had so many members. We wanted something where we could have lots of different ideas. And so I'm summarizing a bit here for the sake of time, but we ended up deciding to go with a book project. And it was based on the research study that we'll describe in a bit more detail right now. And so the research study that became this book that we're publishing is about learning about refugee perspectives on access to and inclusion within the US education system. And because that's such a broad topic, and the US has so many different ways of going about education and refugee policy because of the different states. We decided to focus on our local area. So we focused on Washington, D.C., Maryland, and Virginia, or also known as the DMV. And so from that, we developed our initial research question. What are the experiences of refugees who have arrived to the DMV within the last 5 years in terms of their level of access to and quality of educational services? And so we did end up sticking with this theme, this focus, but we actually ended up expanding our research question throughout the course of our study to refugees who had arrived within the last 10 years based on some challenges with getting enough participants and realizing that we needed a bit of a broader scope because of COVID policies, because of kind of the different situations that refugees found themselves in when arriving. And we also decided to focus specifically on refugees rather than migrants more broadly, because we recognize that there's so many different policies and practices and experiences based on legal status, based on how people arrive. And so we wanted to focus on this one population to get a better sense of their specific challenges. Excuse me, you can go to the next slide. And so we continued to think about within the frame of our study and different chapters and what kind of interviews we might want to do, what sort of services refugees had access to and were available to them, what were barriers that they were facing in accessing education at all levels, and what are recommendations for providers, so nonprofit, public, private entities to better support this population. Next slide. And so from that, this is a brief overview of our research methodology. So we started by outlining some potential themes based on what we thought might fit well into this research topic. And so each of our chapter authors, so different members of the lab, I believe there's 10 to 12 of them total, started doing desk research. And as they did that, us as editors worked on an IRB through GW in order to actually get interviews with different practitioners and refugees. And so once that was approved, we reached out to the refugee community through different nonprofits, different contacts we had across the DMV. And we also reached out to experts because we wanted to balance perspectives so that our recommendations are informed by a variety of different voices. And then we ended up conducting 18 interviews in total. 11 of them were with refugees based in the DMV area, and then 7 with practitioners in the field. After we got those interviews, we transcribed them, we anonymized them in order to protect privacy and confidentiality. And then we did coding data analysis and then pulled those back into the themes identified in the desk research and put it together into the chapters that you'll see in our book. Next slide, and I'll pass over to Jessica.
Thank you, Katie, and thank you, Dr. Wright, for such a wonderful introduction as well. So once we had these themes, we wanted to really base our research in a theoretical framework. So we focused on 4 different aspects, 4 different frameworks, those being decolonialism, so thinking about how to move away from these colonial roots that we see here in the United States and really focus our refugee voices, focus on our refugee voices. We also wanted to include intersectionality, so making sure that we identify all the different identities of our refugees and put those into their stories, put those into our research. So we're not just calling them refugees, we're also taking into account their gender identity, their religion, their ethnicity. All of that is going into who they are as people. And then, excuse me, sorry. We wanted to focus on refugee voice. We really wanted to amplify refugee voices within this work. And we'll see in some of the next slides how we did that. That is very common throughout our book. Every single chapter has quotes from refugees that we took from our interviews. And finally, we did bring in aspects of critical race theory throughout the book as well. making sure that this was a topic that we had, since it is very relevant within the world today. And so our main themes that break up our book are access, inclusion, and application. So access, talking about how refugees can access education here in the DMV area and in the greater United States as a whole. Inclusion, how they're included within the community of their schools, of their education. And then application, so how we can apply our recommendations in the future and how providers and experts can use our recommendations to give better services to refugees in the education sector. So the key takeaways that we had from each of these topics that we chose. So when it came to access, what we heard was that financial barriers, legal barriers, and frequent policy changes were the biggest problems that refugees faced in accessing education when they arrived here in the US, specifically in the DMV. So financial barriers really came towards the higher education side of things, that refugees felt they didn't have the financial capability to be able to go to higher education. Legal barriers coming with visas and immigration paperwork and all of that comes into being a refugee. That was very difficult for them. Additionally, different documentation requirements that schools had were difficult for some refugees to achieve. And then frequent policy changes over the past 4 or 5 years. Policy has been changing rapidly, and so that was hard for a lot of the refugee community to keep up with. So inclusion, once they were accessing school, once they were in school, their problems were a lack of community and school support, cultural and language differences, and mental health and trauma. This is what we heard from our refugees. So the lack of community and school support, just feeling like they were left alone, that they didn't know how to access different parts of the system and be able to participate in the school system. The cultural and language differences was a very big barrier that we heard. So many of our refugees felt like they didn't have the language capabilities, abilities to be able to participate and be included within the school community. And then, of course, mental health and trauma is such a huge aspect of this. They have specific needs. They went through a traumatic event and were not being given those services that they needed to be able to succeed in the school system. And finally, application. So some of the things that we heard were that there's a need for information sharing and dissemination within the refugee community to be able to understand how to access and be included within the school system. There needs to be communication and coordination between stakeholders. So a lot of the refugees said that they were hearing different things from different people. Organizations were not talking to each other. So they were kind of caught in this mix of not really knowing what the correct information was. And then also alternative education pathways should be offered. So some refugees said that it was just impossible for them to access the system because they came in the middle of the school year, or they aged out of the system, and so they weren't able to get that access. So some alternative education pathways should be created to help those students. So as we mentioned before, refugee voice is prominent within our book. So in the next few slides, we have some different quotes that we've collected from our refugees and a few of our experts. So I'll read these ones here and then I'll pass it over to Katie to read the next ones. But so this one is from Elizabeth, who is a refugee who received her graduate degree here in Washington, D.C. And she said that was one big challenge, and not having a sense of belonging due to various factors, like that comparison factor, feeling like you are too poor to be in college, but at the same time, knowing that I belong here, I deserve to be successful, to be educated. So this really goes back to the point of financial insecurity, not feeling like she could be part of the community because of her finances, but knowing that she had the smarts, she had the will and the knowledge to be there, and just feeling like she wasn't part of that community. And then she also said, I want policymakers to also prioritize mental health for refugee population. I swear, I think that I would have benefited a lot in secondary school with counseling, but I didn't get that counseling. So again, going back to that trauma she experienced being a refugee, but not having anyone there to provide mental health services for her, and feeling like that held her back in secondary school and of course into the future as well. Okay.
And I should note that all of these quotes the names are anonymized, so it's not actually Elizabeth. We are protecting our participants. So this next quote says, my teachers are really nice, but that doesn't mean I feel seen because they don't know my background. They treat me like another American who grew up here, but I should not be treated that way. And so this also speaks to the theme of inclusion in school and challenges with belonging, challenges with teachers' preparedness to serve and provide the support that refugee students identified that they need. We can go to the next slide. And here is a quote from Ellie, a refugee student enrolling in Maryland. Ellie said, I think we received a tremendous amount of help from the school officials to get enrolled before the deadline. I mean, that was incredible. They just did everything. We were just, here are our files, and boom, 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 they did everything. I felt supported. And one of the reasons why we were so focused on identifying refugee voice and amplifying them within our book is because we recognize that refugees' experiences are not all the same. While Alif said they felt supported by the school officials, others said that they didn't, that they needed more support, that they faced challenges. And so we thought it was really important to showcase these different experiences, and that while some might face barriers, others might have gotten the support. And so there are kind of ways to highlight potential positive examples. Jessica can go to the next one.
Okay. So this is one of our expert voices. So Jennifer, she is a refugee policy expert at a nonprofit. And so she said, older refugee students arrive at the school and the administrators say, you don't have any kind of an education and you're not literate and you're not going to graduate within 4 years and you're going to mess up my data and I'm going to get fired. So let's send you to adult education. And unfortunately, we heard this from a lot of our experts, that students were not meeting the standards of the school. And so they were left out of the school system or put into adult education where they weren't necessarily belonging. So we found that we identified this as a major problem in the work that we did. So that kind of goes into the next few slides here, which is our call to action and the results from our study. So the call to action, we had 5 different areas that we wanted to really focus on and encourage people to work towards better access and inclusion in education for refugees. So first, scholars. We encourage you to listen and partner with refugees, include their voices in your work, and make sure that their voices are heard and recognized and accepted and included. Policymakers, we have to remove and reduce barriers. We found so many barriers. We heard it from not only the refugees themselves, but also experts and people who work within the field. Just all these different barriers that are making it so hard to access and be included in education for refugees. So we need to work hard to remove those. Nonprofit and resettlement organizations need to engage and collaborate with refugees to understand their own unique needs. This also goes into school leadership, staff, and teachers. They need to look at the school policies and understand how they can be changed or adapted to work with the unique needs of refugees. And finally, refugees themselves need to make their voices heard. Don't be afraid to speak out. Don't be afraid to stand up for yourself, or we're working with you. We want to make sure that we amplify those voices. So that is our call to action. And I will hand it back over to Bernhard to discuss a little bit about how we took this study and made it into a book that will be published hopefully within the next few weeks.
Thank you, Jessica and Katie, for that really a good summary of just the big points of the book. And obviously, we very much hope people will be interested in reading it. It'll be at the library, so you can get it free. But if you want to give it as a wonderful Christmas stocking stuffer, that would be possible too. Just a couple things on the process. Basically, some refugees wanted to be named because they really felt ownership over their experience, and they didn't want to sort of hide behind a fake name. They wanted to tell their story and stand behind that. But we did go back and forth with IRB, and if we name some, we would have to name all, and that didn't work either. So we decided to go with the anonymizing. But and they agreed to that. But they did. Many of them were very proud of having sort of worked through all the barriers that were mentioned just now. Also working, with a group of 12 students who had never, except for Jessica and Katie, who had not published before in a book with a publisher or with major journals was, I wouldn't even call it challenging, but it was, getting them to learn how to go through the process of, really carefully documenting what they were saying with evidence and bringing in the right sources and doing the right formatting and structuring the chapter right in terms of the guidelines we as editors gave them was a lengthy process. So we had internal peer review, so they all reviewed each other's chapters. We had the review by the co-editors, Jessica and Katie, and then we had me reviewing after they reviewed, and then we had the publisher. We had an external blind reviewer as well, go through the whole manuscript. And then we had the line editors from the editors going through with the proofs. And I'm proud to say that the proofs we got back, they were like blank. I mean, we didn't see anything. And we said, this is very odd. I've never had proofs that come back with nothing to do. And they said, no, this was extremely clean copy. This was really a very polished draft. And they didn't have a lot for us to do after we'd been through those other layers of review that I mentioned. So that was something I pleasantly experienced for the first time. And I credit that to my amazing co-editors and these great students who were just extremely hardworking, really on the ball. People, met deadlines. They did serious digging through the literature, and they really used those quotes that with our coding system that identified the themes, and they really pulled that into their chapters. So it was quite amazing how they pulled it together. In terms of, let's see, the indexing is something that I did farm out to an independent indexer because it's extremely involved, and I just didn't think it was right to put that on my co-editors or me. So I did get someone to do that professionally, and it turned out not to be too expensive. I got a couple different quotes on that. And then the cover, as I said, we're trying to get the right design for that. We have a lot of options. We have some images. A lot of them don't work. So we're trying to just get that right, because I do think a good cover can attract someone to at least pick up a book and page through it. But I find academic book covers often very boring and plain. So I was trying to think of some way to make it more interesting, but we haven't decided on the final look yet. It's been a back and forth with the editors, a lot of back and forth. And then finally, getting endorsements has been a really great validating process, because I gave our publishers a whole bunch of names of people that are well-known scholars in the field. I also, this is an interesting story. I'm a great admirer of Jamie Raskin. He's a U.S. congressman from Maryland, and I heard him on a speech about refugee issues years ago, and he was incredibly articulate and incredibly sensitive in the way he talked about it. And I was really moved by his interest in refugees in particular in the DMV. And I just had this idea of, like, wouldn't it be amazing if he knew about our work? And I contacted his office, his legislative office, and I initially asked him to write the foreword to the book, and that looked like it was going to happen. And then in the last minute, it didn't happen. As you know, he's been very busy with the impeachment hearing and all kinds of things he does. He's very high profile, but he was very nice and supportive, and he did write an endorsement, which I think is great. And I hesitated because I didn't want to show any kind of partisanship in the book or the lab, and obviously having a well-known congressperson or senator from one side would do that. But I just think with him, it's worth it, because he's so he's so meaningful in the way he looks at these issues, and it is a book about the DMV, and he represents Maryland, so it made a lot of sense. But we also got some really good testimonials from people, someone at the Oxford Refugee Studies Center. He's a very well-known scholar. You see him here, Tom Scott Smith. That was a fantastic endorsement. We got one from Sally Baker. She's a very well-known scholar in Australia who spoke with our lab in the past. We got some from Boston College and from Guilford College. Kyle Farnbury is the president of Guilford. They have a program called Every Campus a Refuge. It's really living by the idea of truly opening up your home and your campus to refugees. They do that more than anybody I can think of. Columbia has a very good program where they give huge funding to refugees. It's an amazing program. So Columbia is also great up there on that, but Guilford is just phenomenal. So getting that from the president of Guilford was very powerful. And Kyle and I go back, we've worked on proposals, we've worked on other things together. He's also well known at GW. He used to be on the board of directors. He's just a great guy. And yeah, so that process was lengthy, getting those endorsements, which the publisher asks for. I don't actually ask for them. I just give the publisher the names, and then the person decides if they want to do it. But it was validating to see some really good support for this book, which you can see on the flyer if you look at that, and it's on the website for the book. So I think that's all I have to say. We are at 9:44. So I'll close with that, and then obviously we're open to any questions. And thank you so much for your attention, and I hope you'll be interested in looking closely at the book.